Section 17 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An Expedition Through the Yukon District by Charles Willard Hayes. Part 1. Presented before the Society, February 5th, 1892. Introduction. An expedition in the interest of a syndicate of newspapers was organized in the spring of 1891 by Mr. Frederick Schwatka for exploring portions of the Yukon Basin in the British Northwest Territory and Alaska, particularly the region lying north of the St. Elias Mountains. A request was made to the Director of the United States Geological Survey for a geologist to accompany the expedition, and it was the good fortune of the writer to be detailed for that duty. Under the conditions of travel, only a hasty reconnaissance of the region traversed was possible, but so little has been known of it geologically or otherwise that such observations as were made possess a value out of proportion to their completeness. It is the object of this paper to give in systematic form the main facts of scientific interest observed during the journey. A full account of the journey itself, which is not without interest, cannot be given here, but will appear elsewhere through its appropriate channels. Enough of the narrative will be included, however, to indicate the route and means of travel and something of the conditions under which the scientific observations were made. Mr. Schwatka's original plan was to go over Chilkoot Pass and down the Lewis, following the regular miner's route to the interior. But on reaching Juneau, at the request of the citizens backed up by their substantial assistance, it was decided to go in by way of Taku River, with a view to determining whether a trail of pack animals could be constructed over that route. Considerable information of an indefinite sort was available concerning the country to be traversed before reaching Lewis River. The pioneers of the Western Union Telegraph Company crossed the upper portion of the Taku Basin in passing from the Stikine to the Lewis, but the map which resulted from their explorations is only a very crude approximation to the topographic facts, and must have been drawn largely from memory. Dr. Dawson obtained from a prospector named Boswell some information concerning Teslin River and Lake Ahklen, which he embodied in the map accompanying his report on the Yukon district. The location and form of the lake proved to be remarkably accurate, though the regularity of the topographic features of the region is such that a clear idea of their relations is easily obtained even without instruments. The whole of the route from Taku Inlet to the Lewis was traversed in the spring and summer of 1890 by a party of 8 miners, among whom Mark Russell, a member of our party, was the leading spirit. They started from Juneau before the ice was out of the river, hauling their outfit on hand sleds so long as the snow lasted, and then packing them. It required 80 days to reach the lake, where the party built a number of boats. After prospecting the Nisutlin and other streams on the eastern side of Ahklen Valley, they went down the Teslin and back to the coast by Lewis River and Chilkoot Pass. This is an example of the many unheralded expeditions which the Alaskan prospectors have carried out, facing dangers and privations which appear incredible to one who is not familiar with the men themselves. Less arduous or novel expeditions have brought fame to explorers better versed in the art of advertising than these unassuming miners. Unfortunately, however, geography is but slightly the gainer from the work of the prospector, since he usually has neither the training nor the inclination to use instruments, even if he should be supplied with them, which is rarely the case, and ordinarily the map which he draws from memory, unassisted by notes of any sort, is not a model of accuracy. At the head of Taku Inlet a track survey was begun and carried continuously to the mouth of Teslin River, where it connected with the line surveyed by Mr. Ogilvie in 1886. The instruments used were a prismatic compass for determining direction and a sextant for latitude. distance was obtained during the boat journey on the Taku, Lake Ahklen, and Teslin River by time and eye estimates, and on the portage between Taku River and the lake by pacing. Altitudes were determined from the mean of 4 aneroids with synchronous readings of a base barometer at Juneau, for which we are indebted to the kindness of Mr. E. S. Willard. The route was plotted in the notebook and relief indicated by sketch contours, all prominent points within sight along the line of travel being approximately located by compass bearings. While such a survey does not of course possess the precision of an instrumentally measured line, still, when carefully executed, it represents the character and relations of the topographic features of a country with a fair degree of accuracy. Between Yukon River and the St. Elias Mountains lies a large area embracing the whole of White River and its tributaries, as well as the head waters of the Copper and Tanana, which has been geographically a blank. So far as can be learned, it had never been penetrated by a white man, and the lakes, rivers, and mountains which appear on many maps are products of the geographer's imagination. Across this unknown region a track survey was made similar to the one already described. Excepting about 50 miles traversed by water, the whole distance of 330 miles from Selkirk on the Yukon to the junction of Chittenah and Nizzenah rivers was carefully paced, and the two ends of the line being located by astronomic observations, the former by Ogilvie and the latter by Allen, the location of intermediate points cannot be far out of the way. The portion of our route between the mouth of the Teslin and Selkirk at the junction of the Lewis and Pelly had already been twice surveyed, first by C. A. Homan, the topographer of Schwatka's party, in 1883, and more accurately by Ogilvie in 1887. Chittenah and Copper rivers had been surveyed by Allen in 1885, so that no continuous survey of these rivers was undertaken, though numerous observations were made to supplement those embodied in Allen's map. Narrative of the expedition. Our party consisted at the start of 3 white men, Mr. Schwatka, the prospector Mark Russell, and the writer, with 7 Indians engaged as boatmen and packers for the first stage of the journey. After a few days spent in completing the outfit and waiting for the river to become free of ice, we left Juneau May 25, 1891. The large 2-ton dugout canoe in which we embarked was well adapted for navigating the deep waters of the inlet, but we found it poorly suited to the swift and shallow river. When the wind blew upstream, rapid progress was made in spite of the current by spreading 2 large sails, wing and wing. But when the wind failed, our progress, by poling or tracking wherever the banks permitted, was painfully slow. 7 days were spent in reaching the head of canoe navigation, 8 miles above the South Fork and about 80 from Juneau. During this part of the journey little opportunity was afforded for studying the geology of the region traversed, since the boatmen generally kept to the middle of the valley, and we usually made camp at night on one of the small islands which separate the river into many channels. While Taku River is far from being an ideal highway to the interior, still a flat-bottomed steamer of light draught and good power would probably have no serious difficulty in reaching the mouth of the South Fork, less than 100 miles from a point on Lake Ahklen which could be reached by steamer from the mouth of the Yukon. The country intervening between these points is practicable for pack animals, with the expenditure of comparatively little labor in constructing a trail. It is probably only a question of time when some better way of reaching the upper Yukon basin than Chilkoot Pass will be demanded, and the Taku route is, so far as yet known, the least objectionable. At the head of canoe navigation our outfit was made up into 12 packs of about 100 pounds each for the portage of 85 miles to the head of Lake Ahklen. As there were about 6 packers, each was obliged to make 2 trips, so that our progress was extremely slow. The first 20 miles of the portage are in the narrow canyon-like valley of an eastern branch of the river, and the next 50 in broad valleys of the upper Taku basin, from 3,500 to 5,000 feet above sea level. The last 15 miles are in the densely wooded Ahklen valley among innumerable small lakes and ponds. We reached Lake Ahklen June 16th, and from this point the Indians were sent back to the coast. It was with a feeling of great relief that we watched them disappear on their homeward journey and knew that we were no longer dependent on their caprice. Setting up the 2 portable canvas canoes which had been packed in from the coast, we continued our journey toward the northwest, down Lake Ahklen and Teslin River, which forms its outlet. The Lewis was reached June 24th, and Selkirk at the junction of the Lewis and Pelly 4 days later. The original plan had been to continue down the Yukon to the mouth of White River and up that stream so far as possible by boat, but the Indians whom we found at Selkirk told us the easier route to the head of White River was overland, keeping southeast of the main river valley, and this route we decided to follow. A store has recently been established on the site of old Fort Selkirk, the Hudson Bay Company's post, which was burned by the coast Indians in 1848. The trader, Mr. Harper, was down the river, and we found only a couple of Indians whom he had left in charge. These were dispatched up the Pelly to collect the natives in the vicinity, and we soon had about 40 of them camped around us. Only a few of them, however, were able-bodied men, and it was extremely difficult to persuade these to go with us, and when they had promised, it was only to back out the next day. After laboring with them for over a week, it seemed that the attempt to secure the necessary packers was hopeless, and we were preparing to go down to the mouth of White River and try the ascent by boat, when the tide was turned by the opportune arrival of a prospector, Frank Bowker. He had come up the river from 40 Mile Creek, intending to spend the summer prospecting in White River Basin. With him were 2 natives from further down the river, muscular and willing fellows, very different from the wretched specimens from Pelly River. Bowker's arrival, as he came with authority from Mr. Harper, who has great influence over the natives, put new backbone into our enterprise. 5 packers were soon secured, who promised to go with us to the country of Scolai, beyond the mountains. Dogs were obtained to carry the remainder of the outfit, from 25 to 40 pounds being packed upon each in panniers of birch bark or moose skin. On July 9th, our combined party of 4 white men, 8 Indians, and 11 dogs left Selkirk. Our course lay towards the southwest over the great interior plateau which stretches from the Yukon to the St. Elias Mountains. The headwaters of Selwyn River were crossed and several eastern tributaries of White River. The country is very scantily peopled, and although we probably saw most of the natives inhabiting the White River basin, they only numbered altogether between 50 and 60 persons. The first party, consisting of 6 families, was camped on the Nisling, making a fish trap in anticipation of arrival of the salmon, which was anxiously looked for. These Indians are closely related to those living on the Pelly. They are similar in appearance and mode of life, and apparently speak the same language. They have no permanent dwellings, but several substantial log caches were seen, which they use for storing their winter supply of dried fish and moose meat. The country seems to be fairly well supplied with game, goats on the highest rocky summits, moose and bear in the river valleys, and reindeer or barren grounds caribou on the plateau above timber line. Several of the latter were killed by members of our party, and our supply of provisions was also helped out by the dried meat which we obtained from the natives. On the Kluantu was found a second party of Indians, most of whom had never before seen a white man. Obtaining a number of rafts from these natives, we descended the river about 14 miles to its confluence with the Donjek, since both the Kluantu and Donjek were too deep and rapid to ford. The Klutlan was also found to be unfordable, and we were compelled to go around its head and cross upon the glacier from which it flows. Although this was not attended by any special danger, it caused great dismay among the Indians, who regard a glacier with superstitious terror. About 12 miles beyond Klutlan Glacier we reached a small stream called the Kletsan or Copper Creek, coming from a narrow gorge in the mountains. This is where the Yukon Indians have been accustomed to come for supplies of native copper. It was as far as any of our packers had ever been from home, and they knew of the country beyond only by report. They refused to go with us further, assuring us that it was quite impossible to get through the mountains at that season, since the pass was only traveled by Indians in the winter on snowshoes. Boker had already come further than he originally intended, so that he turned back with the Indians. It was something over 200 miles back to Selkirk, and although through an unknown country, a considerably shorter distance to an Indian village on the other side of the mountains. Trusting in our ability to reach the latter inside of 2 weeks, a period for which we had provisions, we decided to push forward. Discarding everything not absolutely essential, our packs still amounted to 75 or 80 pounds apiece, so that progress was necessarily slow. The weather since leaving the coast in May had been very warm, with little rain except local thunder showers, but from this time until we again reached the coast, rain was falling most of the time. As we had no tent, this added greatly to our discomfort. Leaving the Kletsan, our party now reduced to 3, we continued toward the northwest through the densely wooded valley, with the White River on our right and the steep mountain face on the left. At the end of the 3rd day we came out upon White River, flowing from the south in a deep narrow valley. This we concluded must be the pass of which the Indians had told us, and our belief was strengthened by meeting a high wind amounting almost to a gale, blowing through from the south. A couple of miles back from its mouth, a wall of moraine-covered ice stretched across the valley, the river emerging from a tunnel on the extreme western side. This was undoubtedly the ice which the Indians said it would take us at least 4 days to cross. As usual, however, their statement was wide of the truth. Crossing a couple of miles of rough moraine-covered glacier with a gradual ascent toward the south, we came to a long stretch of firm white ice, upon which walking was a positive luxury after our days of floundering in the deep moss and alder thickets of White River Valley. We continued to ascend gradually for about 10 miles, directing our course toward a low saddle in the mountains on the south, which we supposed to be the pass. Toward evening, however, we were surprised to find the surface of the glacier descending, and a little later discovered a deep narrow gorge turning off to the right, almost at right angles with our former course. We had crossed the divide, and in a short time were off the ice and camped on a stream flowing into the Pacific. This was the Nizzenah, a tributary of the Chittenah, or eastern branch of Copper River. The next 4 days we continued our journey down the narrow canyon which this stream has cut through the mountain range, and encountered the most difficult traveling we had yet found. The vegetation on the southern side of this range rivals in luxuriance that of the coast. Forcing our way through the dense growth of alder and spruce which covers the steep slopes at the base of canyon walls was extremely slow and painful work. A mile in 4 or 5 hours was counted fair progress. At length, after having been compelled to ford the river several times, we reached a point at which it appeared not wholly impracticable for boating, and it was decided to stop and build a boat. Our tools consisted of a very dull axe and our pocket knives, but with these we hewed out a keel and gunwales from spruce saplings and fashioned ribs from willow poles, lashing the structure together with twine ravelled from our pack ropes. Over this frame was stretched the canvas in which our bedding had been wrapped, and finally the covering was smeared liberally with spruce gum. In this craft our progress was more rapid and not without excitement. The river has a fall of about 20 feet to the mile, so that it is practically a continuous rapid from the point where we embarked 35 miles down to its confluence with the Chittenah. For 7 miles above the confluence the river flows through a canyon with rocky walls from 350 to 500 feet high. It is extremely narrow and crooked. the water, which above the canyon frequently spreads out half a mile or more in breadth, being compressed into a channel in places only a few yards across. We were presumably on a part of the river descended by Lieutenant Allen in 1886 with a crew of natives, but thus far had been unable to make the country fit his map, and were in doubt until we reached the lower end of the canyon, when it was of less interest to know that another had been through than it would have been before we started in. After endeavoring with poor success to learn something of the character of the canyon from the top of the bluffs, we decided to attempt its passage. Our boat was tossed from side to side like a shuttlecock, whirled around sharp projecting points of rock and through narrow chutes with a velocity that fairly took our breath. Twice more the canyon wall was scaled, but the river could be seen only a short distance ahead. Several times we came uncomfortably near disaster, and that we got through in safety is largely due to the coolness and skill with which Mark Russell navigated our craft. Continuing down the Chittenah about 40 miles to its confluence with Copper River, we reached Taral, a few miles below the confluence, August 12th, just 14 days after the natives left us on White River. We had come through exactly on schedule time, with 3 pounds of flour and a handful of tea remaining of the provisions with which we left Selkirk. At Taral we found Nicolai, or Scolai, as the Yukon Indians call him, the autocrat of the Copper River country. He gave us a most hospitable reception and supplied us with provisions so far as his limited stores permitted. Salmon, both fresh and dried, were abundant, so that we had no further apprehension of famine. The Copper River Indians have an unenviable reputation for treachery and hostility to the whites, but we saw nothing to justify it. They are greatly superior to the Yukon natives, physically at least, and have a much more elaborate family and tribal organization. We were so fortunate as to reach Taral just as Nicolai was preparing for his annual visit to the coast, and after a delay of 4 days we embarked in a large skin boat manned by 10 of his vassals. A couple of days brought us down to Miles Glacier, where the river tumbles over a dam of huge moraine boulders. It is necessary to make a portage here sometimes across both moraine and glacier. Crossing about 2 miles of moraine covered with a dense alder thicket, we came out upon a high ridge of freshly deposited boulders. Immediately in front was a broad expansion of the river in front of the glacier, which formed an ice cliff along one side, nearly 400 feet in height. Bergs were almost constantly falling with reports like thunder, dashing the spray high above the top of the cliff. The current of the river sets across the lake toward the front of the glacier, and where it meets the swell produced by a falling mass of ice, the water is thrown into enormous breakers which, with the grinding icebergs, would swamp a boat instantly. Nicolai decided that we might get past by waiting for a lull in the falling of the ice, and for a wind from the right direction to open a passage through the floating bergs. The right moment came after a wait of nearly a day, and tumbling things into the boat, we were soon past the dangerous spot to the evident relief of Nicolai and his crew. A short distance below we passed the fronts of Childs Glacier, running within a stone's throw of the lofty wall of ice, and found ourselves at the head of the river delta, with the blue Pacific in sight far to the southward. It lacked a few days of being 3 months since we had left the coast at Juneau, and in that time we had travelled almost exactly 1,000 miles, nearly half the distance being on foot. Nicolai intended going to Eyak, where 2 salmon canneries are located on a narrow neck of the peninsula between the Copper River delta and Prince William Sound. When within a few miles of that place, we were met by a native with a report that the Eyak canneries had closed and the traders had left. This report, which we afterward found to be the invention of a rival trader, turned us back to the head of the delta and down one of the eastern channels 50 miles out of our way, and delayed our arrival at Eyak about 4 days. On account of this delay we missed the August mail steamer from the Sound by 12 hours, and were obliged to wait there a month for the September steamer. Thanks to the abundant hospitality of Captain Humphrey, superintendent of the Pacific Steam Whaling Company's cannery, Our detention there was rendered far from unpleasant, and the opportunity was afforded of examining this little known region. Taking passage September 21st on the mail steamer Elsie from Natchez, we reached Sitka 4 days later, connecting there with the steamer Mexico for Puget Sound. End of section 17.